So I think the flip side of this that we saw in the last election is sort of right after the election. The Democrats were kind of trying to recoup, and I know that Marco Rubio and a couple of other Republican politicians sort of came out and looked at these same statistics and kind of gloated that this shows that the Republicans are actually now the multiracial working class party. And I mean, I thought I found that statement really funny because that's the language of the left, right?
Right.
But here we have Marco Rubio, and I want to say maybe Donald Trump, I can't remember, but like Josh Hawley and other politicians like that kind of wanted to use these results to say that the GOP is actually the home of the working class. And I know that you have some comments on that and like just the phenomenon of so-called right-wing populism in general. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something we really have to think about. Donald Trump, he rode to the White House in 2016 with this surprising amount of support from working class voters. He won the highest union vote totals of any Republican candidate since Ronald Reagan. And for many, if you look at a lot of his long speeches and rallies, some people identified his campaign more with promises to end bad trade deals and bring good jobs back rather than racism and xenophobia. And so despite losing the 2020 election, Trump's working class support was pretty resilient, and Biden only squeaked by on the back of these affluent suburbanites. And I think, like you said, this has prompted some figures in the Republican Party to become giddy of this idea of having a more permanent working class base. So the exact quote from Marco Rubio is, the future of their party is based on a multi-ethnic, multiracial working class coalition. Sounds like something that could have come out of a DSA pamphlet. And take a look at this video from Missouri Senator Josh Hawley speaking on this question.
Well, the president really tried to make the Republican Party a working class party. I mean, a party of normal, everyday voters, those who don't have a job on Wall Street, those who don't want to go start a tech company, maybe those who don't have a four-year college degree, which, by the way, is 70% of Americans. And the president tried to refocus this party on those Americans, on their concerns, on their needs, on their family security, on their jobs. And he was right to do so. And I think we've got a big battle in front of us. Whether the president wins or loses tomorrow, we've got a big battle in front of us, Republicans do, to try and make this party truly the party of working class America.
So there you go. Great news. We have a Labor Party.
Yep.
And it's not just high profile political figures that are thinking this. It appears that there is some kind of infrastructure being built around these ideas as well. So you have think tanks like American Compass, launched by Orrin Cass, the former campaign advisor to that fighting working class champion Mitt Romney. And these have emerged and are actually putting out policy papers entertaining the possibility of conservatives even supporting unions. So, what is the left to think of all this? And unfortunately, it's all bullshit. The right wing will never become a pro-worker, let alone a pro-union force. And let's just start by looking at the 4 years of the Trump administration. If ever there was a maverick who could make the Republicans deliver for workers, Trump should have been it. After all, he centered workers in his campaign rhetoric even more than Hillary Clinton did. But the reality is that in just one term, Trump launched an attack on labor that we really haven't seen since the Reagan years. And arguably, he was more effective and efficient than Reagan was. So under Trump, we got national right to work for the public sector, which drains unions of their financial and human resources. He appointed all pro-management people to the National Labor Relations Board. And in 4 short years, they made a slew of decisions that have set back new worker organizing for a long time. He launched a particularly vicious war against federal workers and their unions. He wrote executive orders that did things like evict unions from their offices and curtail the time they could spend representing workers during work hours. OSHA, the Agency for Workplace Safety and Health, something that might just be a little relevant during a global pandemic, has been gutted under Trump. And I think even most importantly, no coherent industrial policy was created to bring high quality manufacturing jobs back. And in fact, manufacturing jobs left the country at an even higher rate during the Trump presidency. And also think about, whatever happened to that infrastructure bill Republicans were supposed to pass when they had control of Congress. But this goes deeper than Trump. Pro-union right-wing populism is a delusion because of the very structure of the Republican Party itself. No one has explained to me how the chief party of capital and big business, the literal preferred party of the Chamber of Commerce, could ever go in a pro-union direction. How can a party controlled by that donor base take such a turn? And for me, all this was given given away in an interview with Orrin Cass in New York Magazine. And he's started up this American Compass think tank. And I think he reveals very quickly that there's no practical political strategy for getting pro-worker policies through the Republican Party. So an interviewer asks, how do you imagine this kind of labor reform actually coming about? For decades, progressives have failed to pass pro-labor legislation that enjoyed the united support of existing unions. Each time they've run into the basic problem that while there are many states with no significant union presence, there are no states that lack an organized business community. And this is Cass's response. I think that's a fair question. And I think if the analysis is being done on the special interest level, then you're exactly right. But on the right of center, I do think there's a genuinely shifting focus to a realization that something is going to have to be done to make the economy work better for the typical worker. So somehow this general realization and general focus by some people on the right is going to overcome the entrenched financial and ideological interests of the most powerful capitalist class in human history. Something about that just doesn't inspire confidence in me. And but this whole premise is also based on a faulty assessment of how the right wing has been able to win elections. So they certainly have managed to garner some working class support, but they're still operating in a context where working class voter participation is declining around the world. So as Dustin Guastella and Ben Fong wrote in their excellent Jacobin article, they say, in places where the populist, corporatist, or national right have made inroads, they've done so as a result of decades of declining turnout. This is the case with the National Front in France, the Five-Star Movement in Liga in Italy, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Right-wing populism is only politically viable amid the general demobilization of working-class voters. So I think what will follow is a familiar story, and I think we can look back to Reagan on this. What happened to many of those lifelong Democrats and union members that voted for Reagan? As it became clear that the Republicans were not going to pursue pro-worker policy or any bold proposals, some drifted back to the Democrats, but many just dropped out of politics. And to conclude, I mean, let's go back to Marco Rubio. Notice what he means when he says working class party. He says, what I mean by working class party is normal, everyday people who don't want to live in a city where there is no police department, where people rampage through the streets every time they're upset about something. Now, granted, he might be right that I think most working people don't want to live in a city without a police department, at least in this current society. But, you know, what he's actually talking about here is a party for the culture war. There's nothing in there about a working class party that actually pursues positive pro-worker policy, like raising the minimum wage or supporting unions or fully funding public education. So in the words of the great George Carlin, it's all bullshit, folks, and it's bad for you. And they're clearly not very serious about this. There is no plan. There is no strategy. And we should call it for what it is. And I think it's shameful that the Democratic Party in the election, didn't bring up these points as an attack on Trump to expose him as kind of like a fake populist. And Jen, I know you also wrote an excellent piece on this question. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts.
Well, so I guess I have like a general question for you, and this is something that I think about all the time. So I definitely agree that this kind of right-wing populism, or this idea that the Republican Party can transform into a workers' party, no, not in Mitch McConnell's party. I don't think that's going to happen. Completely agree. But I think because, especially during the pandemic, we have seen kind of occasional alliances. And I'm thinking here of Josh Hawley and Pramila Jayapal working together to craft a bill to, pay workers' wages who are on furlough, basically paying people to stay home. They both sort of pressed for that. That didn't happen. But recently, Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders worked together to sort of reinstate cash payments in the stimulus package. And I think today it looks like, by all accounts, that's probably going to go in there. I don't think they've decided on an amount yet, but the moral of the story is, they found some common ground there. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on moments like that, whether those are superficial, whether there is actually room to work with people like Josh Hawley, or do we not want to work with him because, he has reprehensible views on a great many other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's room to work with them in the short term. I'm not saying like the priority of Bernie should not be trying to build this grand alliance with right-wing populists, but it's like I mean, for the fact of getting emergency relief, I think the mindset should be we will work with anyone, but I think this is not necessarily like this long-term strategy, but really the position should be we're going to pursue bold pro-worker strategy. If the right-wingers want to tag along, fine. If eventually they'll realize that politically they need to stay viable, fine. But like, this is what we're going to do. And you put the ball in their court. And the big danger here, and I know a lot of people are saying this, it's not just me, and it might be cliche now, but I'm truly afraid that, if Biden just governs like Obama Part 3, a much more dangerous and competent Trump will come along. And I think what that also means is that someone that can do slightly more than the Democrats, enough to get some permanent working class loyalty. And I'm certainly no expert of what's going on in Hungary with Viktor Orban, but kind of what my understanding from people who know a lot more is that, he came in this context of the welfare state being stripped. He hasn't been amazing, but he's restored just enough of that welfare state to make him look better than the neoliberals. And that basically explains most of the support. So if there's a Republican that can offer enough scraps, and meanwhile Biden is arguing against these scraps, I think
we're in trouble.
Yeah, they're in big trouble. So I mean, they should be looking at what Bernie's doing. It's like, yeah, I mean, if more Democrats got on board for that, the story wouldn't be alliance with the right-wing populists. The story would be, one right-wing populist tagging on to what the party is doing.